So, hope you're able to hear me, right? Okay. Yeah. Good morning. Good evening. Hope you're able to hear me, right? Yeah. So let's start. Yeah. I have a severe attendance problem with this patch actually. So I never saw this kind of patch earlier. So very most irregular. Okay. Let's start. So I'll talk about entity object lifecycle. Let's see what is this entity object lifecycle. So you know entity object, or is it 6 p.m.? Just a minute. Just a minute. Let me see. So entity object lifecycle, let's say, so far we have worked with entity objects. What do we mean by entity objects actually? Entity objects means, you see, so far we have worked with all the entity objects itself. Yes. So the specialty of entity objects is that they are basically the state of that entity object can be persisted, will be persisted, can be persisted, and the entity objects, they represent the records in the database server. Entity objects, they represent the records in the database server here. Yes. You know, this entity objects, you'll find that they are represented, sorry, they are managed by the Hibernate. You'll find that they are managed by Hibernate here. Yes. So entity object has got states. We got states, entity object states. Let's see what are they. Transient, persistent, detached, and remote states. So these are the various states of an entity object here. These are the various states of an entity object. Yes. So we'll try to understand the states here and how Hibernate will manage this entity object states. Entity objects life cycle through the states. Now, uh, let me change this database configuration first of all. Let me export this project also. Joined table. Okay, so here, just a second. Let's say in the transaction context here, first of all, we use transaction context to add a product record, right? Yes. Let's say I'll create a product object. Let's say this is a product object now. You know what? You'll find that this product class is mapped to database table. This newly created object, the newly created object which you got here, I can say that the state of this object is transient. This newly created object state is transient. You know, it's just a Java object. Is this record representing? Sorry, this object, is it representing any record in the database server? This object which you got here, is it representing any record in the database server? So it is not representing any record. As of now, you see, it's just newly created. So this object which you got, product object, it is not representing any record in the database server. It is not representing any record in the database server here. Yes. Just a second, I'm switching the connection. Can you people hear me? Okay. So yeah, this object is in transient state, I can say. So Hibernate will not manage this object. It has got nothing to do with this object. Okay. Yes. It's just an object which is in the memory, I can say. It's just an object which is in the memory. Yes. You know, for suppose what if I do this? I'll call the save method and pass the product object to the save method and pass the product object to the save method. Then what happens? So when we pass the product object to the save method, now you know the product object here. It moves from transient state to persistent state, I can say. That object, when you call the safe method and pass that product object to the safe method, it will move from transient state to the persistent state. Yes. It moves from transient state to the persistent state. Yes. Okay. Here, when you call the safe method on the object, okay. But internally, what happens, that is also very important for you people to understand. You know, generally, we obtain a session, right? Whenever you obtain a session object, you will find that with the session, a persistence context is associated. Session is associated to the persistence context, or it is also called as first level cache. I'm not talking about caching completely here. So we have something called as first level cache. Okay. Session is always associated to the first level cache, or we call it as a persistence context. Okay. Yes. So persistence context, I can say that it represents a memory area where you got a collection of persistent objects, I can say. Persistent objects. What are persistent objects? Persistent objects are those objects, are the entity objects associated to the persistence context. Please make a note of this point. Okay. So persistent object. Persistent object. Sorry. Are the entity objects. Persistent objects are the entity objects associated to the persistence context here. Yes. So they are associated to the persistence context. You know, session is responsible for managing the persistent objects. session is responsible for managing the persistent objects here. Managing the persistent objects means what? We'll see that. Okay, don't worry. So as of now, whenever you call the save method and pass the product object to the save method, you know, you will find that the product object, immediately a snapshot or copy of the product object will be created. A snapshot or a copy of the product object will be created here. Sorry. And you will find that the product, that snapshot or copy of that object will be associated to the persistence context. It will be associated to the persistence context here. Yes. So when an object is associated to the persistence context, I can say that that object is a persistent object, so which will be managed by the session. Okay. Whenever you call save method, what happens? A snapshot or copy of that object is created and it is associated to the persistence context. Once an object is associated to the persistence context, that object is called as a persistent object here. That means which is managed by the session. Which is managed by the session. Okay. Yes. This is one way where you'll see this is one type of object you see which will be in the persistence context. Okay. So when you call the save method, this is what happens. Now within the transaction context, so if you're calling if you're fetching a product object, for suppose this way. Okay. Yes. Yes. Even you see the product object which is written by this get method within the transaction context here. You see, I can say that that product object is persistent. It is persistent. The state of that object is persistent, I can say. Okay. Yes. So this object is persistent, I can say. The state of this object is persistent. What if the object is persistent? As I told you people, you know, that the persistent objects are managed by the session. The persistent objects are managed by the session here. Yes. When I say they're managed by the session, so what does that means? They're managed by the session. What does that means? I'll show you people. For suppose, let's say here, I'll update a product price of that product. Let's go through the product price here. So let's check this records once. You have this product record. So the product whose ID is 102, what is the price? It is 17,000. Okay. Yes. Yeah, it is 17,000. So here I'll update it to 15,000. Let's say I'll update it to 15,000. Yes. Now you see I'm using a setter method, and we are trying to update the price in the object which is in the memory, right? Not in the database. So we're using a setter method here. You see, set price. See the setter method, it's very simple method, right? It's not complicated. So just a setter method which will update the price in the memory. It will update the price in the memory, right? Yes. We are not asking Hibernate to update it in the database server. Yes. Now we can't expect this price to be updated in the database server, right? Yes. Just a second. See, I'm executing this code. Let's see what happens. You see, the product price is updated in the database server. Okay. Yes, the price is updated. But we didn't ask Hibernate to update this price, right? Yes. Why it is doing it? Because it's a managed object. It is a managed object. It's a persistent object. Whatever the changes which are done to this object, during the transaction, you will find that those changes will be definitely updated to the database. Those changes you will find that they will be updated to the database server. Okay, they will be updated to the database server here. Yes. That is what happens. Okay. Yep. So now what you can do here, you see, that is about managed object. You see, we don't need to write any code to update this price, right? We don't need to make any changes here to update the price. Simply you have to modify it in the object. Hibernate is going to update those changes in the database. Okay. Now what we'll do is here, we'll try to update this changes after closing the session. You know what happens when you close the session? Once you close the session, the persistence context which is associated, you know, that session, once it is closed, the persistence context associated to that session will be closed. And you know, whatever whatever the objects which are associated to that session persistence context will be destroyed, or not destroyed, they will become detached, I can say. They become detached. You know, once you close the session, you know what happens? Once you close the session, the persistence context associated to the session will be destroyed, and if there are any objects associated to that persistence context, they become detached. Okay. Okay. Yes. Here, detached object means now this object will not be managed by the session anymore. Detached object means this object is not managed by the session anymore. Okay. Yes. So once you see we close the session, now the product object state is detached. And what if the object is detached? As I told you people, it is not managed by the session. So if that object is not managed by the session here, okay, if the object is not managed by the session, so in that case, if I make any changes to this object, will they be updated in the database server? This changes, will they be updated in the database server? So what do you people think? Will they be updated? No, this changes will not be updated in the database server, I can say. This changes will not be updated in the database server. Yes. Okay, fine. So here I'll run this code once and I'll show you people. This time only select query executed and the update query did not execute. That means that record is not updated in the database server. So because this object is not managed, so even if you make any changes, if you make any changes, you see they will not be updated. A Hibernate is not bothered about this object, I can say. That is how the managed object works. Sorry, that is how the detached object works. It is detached. It is not associated to the session anymore. So just to make a note of it. So whenever the session is closed, all the objects which are associated to that persistence context, they become detached. You know that session is associated to the persistence context, right? So whatever the objects you have in that persistence context, persistent objects, they become detached here. Once you close the session, what are all the persistent objects which are in that persistence context will become detached. Yes. Okay. So you know what? One context where the objects become detached is when you close the session. But there is one more way to explicitly make an object detached. We can also explicitly detach an object. You know, even though the session is up and running, even though the session is not closed, still we can detach an object here. You know that we can detach an object. How? You got evict method for that. Evict. In the session, you have this method called as evict. So call this evict method. Call this evict method and pass that object which you want to detach. So this way we can only detach a particular object here. This way we can only detach a particular object here. Yes. Okay. So you see this time the session is not closed. This time the session is not closed. Yes. But that object is detached. Okay. So if the object is detached, you see if I run this code, you see we are trying to update that price from 15,000 to 18,000 again, right? So if I run this code this time, the product price, will it be updated? No, it won't be updated. You see, still you're trying to update that or make the changes to that object within the transaction context, but the changes will not be updated because you'll find that the object is detached. So it is not managed by the session. Yes. So is it clear for you people? Okay. So Here, you know what? We can make a detached object attached again. So it is possible to make a detached object attached again, provided if the session is up and running. If the session is up and running, we can make a detached object attached again. Okay, yes, the session should be up and running. If the session is closed, we can't make a detached object attached again. Okay, yes, it should be up and running here. Yes, fine. So how can we do that? In the session itself, we got a method called as merge. Merge method is there. Okay, in between I'll add a statement, at least one statement. It is not needed though, but just see, we are detaching that object first using evict method, and then we are trying to associate that object to the persistence context. We're trying to associate that object to the persistence context here. Sorry, we're trying to associate that object to the persistence context. So when the object is associated to the persistence context, it becomes a persistent object again, right? It becomes a persistent object. Yes. Now this time, if I execute this code, the changes which we did to that object, will they be updated to the database server? The changes which we did to the object, will they be updated to the database server? Yes. But you see, we are trying to make the changes before that object is persistent, right? When the object is in that state, we are making the changes. Still, do you think the changes are going to be updated to the database server? Okay, yes, that's true. Because here the Hibernate, what it does is it will only update these changes, or session will only update these changes once the transaction is committed. When the transaction is committed, the object is in which state? When the transaction is committed, the object is in which state? It is in persistent state. So if there are any changes made to that object, then definitely they will be updated here. Yes. Okay. Yes, they will be definitely updated. I'll show you people. You see, you got that update statement. Okay. So, the detached object can become persistent again. So there are two ways to detach an object. One is when you close the session, the objects become detached. We can call evict method explicitly and detach a particular object explicitly. Here again, you can make a detached object persistent again by calling the merge method. That is what we saw. Now the last thing here, what I'm going to show you people is, uh, you know, removed state. Removed state. So if you call the delete method on an object, it becomes removed. The state of that object will be removed, I can say. Let's see. So for suppose you got this object which you're fetching. Now in the session we got a delete method. I'll call that delete method here. I'll call that delete method, and you see we'll pass that product object. So what happens when we do this? You will find that this product object the record associated to this product object, the record associated to this product object here, it will be deleted from the database server. Okay, when you call the delete method and pass the product object, what happens? The record associated to this product object will be deleted from the database server. Yes. Okay. Yes. Okay, the record will be deleted. That means that product whose ID is 101 will be deleted. Yes. But what about the product object which is in the memory? Okay, the record which is in the database server, okay, it will be deleted. But what about the product object here? No, it is not possible because session is not managing it, right? Yes. So what happens to the product object which is in the memory? Even that object is deleted. I'm saying that when you call the delete method and pass a product object, so what happens here? The record associated to this product object in the database server will be deleted. But what happens to the product object which is in the memory? We got a product object in the memory, right? So what happens to that product object? Yes. So even that object will be deleted or destroyed. Shift delete. Actually, that object will not be deleted. You know the concept of memory management. So how that objects will be managed is how the objects are managed in the memory. You know that. So there is no chance for us to delete an object or destroy an object, right? We can't do that. We don't have that option to delete an object or to destroy an object. So the object will be retained in the memory. So the state of that object, what is it? Removed state. That means now this object is not representing any record in the database server. This object is not representing any record in the database server here. Okay. Yes. It won't be representing any record in the database server. Yes. So is it clear for you people? So this is the entity object lifecycle. So it's important here. Remember this entity object lifecycle here. Yes, fine. So next we got fetching strategies. It won't take much time, but the thing is I don't want to talk about it because not many people are available. So my blunder. So what I did is I specified the time wrong. So I've asked my wife to, uh, mail the people. So what happened is I told her to mail for 6:30 p.m. batch. Instead, what she did is she thought the timing is 6:30 and 6 actually not even 6:30. She just typed it 6 and sent it. Sorry, my bad. So we'll meet tomorrow morning at our regular time. We got a class tomorrow morning, and in the next class I'll talk about the fetching strategies and I'll start with transaction management also very important. Okay, good. So that's all. Okay, thank you. Bye bye. So you got a class tomorrow morning at our regular time, 8 a.m. Central Time.